I'm back! Hey everybody, it's Atlas. I'm back from Springfest here in California, which just ended this last weekend. I am recording this the Monday after, and we rented an Airbnb for the weekend. I played both days, and then I just got home like an hour ago at the time of recording this, and I am exhausted. But I'm here to give you a Tachikaze premium deck profile, because though my team as a whole did not do well, we scrubbed out after 4 rounds, I put a lot of work into the deck, and the deck ended up going 4-0 personally, so I figured that's good enough. Also, content. So the thing with Tachikaze is that it has such a robust card pool with so many almost conflicting lines of play that I took months, like literally from, I don't know, January through March. I was testing, and this is what I came up with. The deck log for the thing is in the description, as I did last time. I know it's easy to just go, oh, I'm gonna click on it and then get the list that way. Go ahead, but maybe hang out with me while I talk about my choices. And starting off first, I have Ancient Dragon Spinodriver. He's your main grade 3 ride, got the Excel. When you ride him or he's rode upon, you counterblast, retire 2. You get an extra Excel marker. So that means that if you do Excel 2, you get to draw 2. So his effect and the retiring the 2 rear guards turns out into a wash. But it can be a momentum swing, depending what it is you kill. You draw a card, choose a card from your hand, call it to rear, then choose 2 of your units and they get plus 5k. The fact that this also works when rode upon means that you can use it in other decks where you like ride it first and then ride another thing on top, which might become a factor in a few months. And then the other effect is on rear if you get a drive check, put a gauge on it. So this is being used in the vast majority of Tachikaze decks in premium. Even with other stuff, just because it's so flexible in and of itself. The fact that you can use it by, like, on your turn 3 to extend your attacks or any other subsequent turn, and you can speed to 2 Excel markers, which means you only need to ride once before having 5 front row circles to do attacks with. He's just so good. He's not broken, which is cool. He's just nice, and he's a well-balanced card for what he is. I also included 2 copies of Penetrate Dragon Tribash, the thing from Dragon Empire, which is when your Vanguard attacks if the opponent has 2 or less rear guards, you put him in soul and gets a crit for that battle. The main thing is, sometimes you don't find Spinodriver, and this is a 13k body you can ride, which is okay, because maybe you ride the second one and get Persona Ride. But the main thing is that when your Neberos attacks the Stride, you can use that to facilitate another crit. So you can like swing with this, then swing with your Vanguard. It gets another soul for you, which Tachikaze can run out of pretty quick, and puts a lot of pressure on for very little commitment. This is where it starts getting wonky. So instead of doing like 4, 4, 4, 4 of everything, I started playing with ratios where there's 2 schools of thought in Tachikaze Premium. There's the Anger Blader version, which is I don't want to kill any of my guys. I want to put gauges under everything and then attack with those, and then they're just big and powerful, and that's it. And then there's the gauge calling version, which includes Regiodon here. He and Blue Sprint have the same effect, which is when they attack, you can put a gauge somewhere. And then when they're retired, your card effect, you can call one of the gauges under it to rear. And then you can put a gauge on that if you want. This means that you can like swing with it, eat it with something else, and then it turns into something else. It's a hard once per turn, which means you can't like spam them back and forth, which would be cool, but they just didn't do that. I had this thing at 4, then I had it at 2, then I didn't have it at all, but this is at 3 right now, and I'm going to explain my onus behind each grade 2 ratio once I get through the grade 2s. So the next thing was Turbo Smilodon, which is the kitty, which is on player, on attack, put a gauge somewhere. That's incredibly flexible. It can be used pretty much any time of the game. Yes, he kind of falls off toward the end, but sometimes he is still useful in that sense. You want to see him as much as possible. There's 2 copies of Spino Extort, which is a card I really, really love that I wish was better, but the problem is that you need to counterblast to facilitate his retire, which is on attack, counterblast, kill one of your things, draw, call one of the gauges that was under it to rear, and then put a gauge under it. So if you kill a Regiodon or a Blue Sprint, that turns into a +2 because you attack with Spino extort. You lose the Regiodon or the Blue Sprint. You get the gauge that was under it from Spino extort's effect. You get the gauge that was under it from their own effect, and then you also draw a card. So lose one card, get 2. That's a +2, my friend. It just kind of sucks because he needs a counterblast and you can be damage denied, so he's at a lower number than the others. There's 3 copies of Megarex, which, again, you guys remember this, kill something, draw, counterblast, gauge, he gets 5k for each one. That's flexible anytime. And then 3 copies of Sweeper Concanto. And the reason for this is that A, it saved my ass during one of the games, but it's mostly because this card gets so big that for every gauge under it, it gets 5k, then if it has 3 or more, it can't be chosen by the opponent's effects. So this means that it gets around things like Brilliant Blister, it gets around, I think it gets around Denial Griffin, it gets around pretty much any disruptive thing that your opponent wants to do, and especially because of how quickly you can load gauge onto it by pretty much anything, because when he attacks he puts a gauge on himself. It can snowball pretty quickly. You can also use it with the Anger Blader's Stride to just restand him and swing again. At the same time, if you're on Neberos, who can put gauges or rear guards and drop zone to get his restand, you can just farm gauges off of this thing. Let's say you got 4 on him. You can knock off 2, so that's 2 of the 5 cards needed for Neberos' restand. And then when Sweeper swings again, he'll be at 24. So it's just such a good, flexible card that I think a lot of people who play the gauge calling version of the deck are more focused on, well, why would I run Sweeper? He's like in the way. I just kind of disagree with that. I think there's so much you can do, especially Tachi's being Excel. You can play with the setup of your field in that way. The reason that none of these are at 4 is because most of the time, one, I couldn't decide. I'll just be honest, I couldn't decide. But the other thing is that I feel like having the flexibility of going through your deck as fast as you do in this deck, where you draw a lot of cards, you get a lot of cards back to hand. Neberos gets you 6 cards off your drive checks. It just leads to a lot of flexibility in not just the ratios of everything, but it also means you can run that kind of gelatinous numbers for everything. Gelatinous numbers, that made for a good band name. Alright, our grade 1s. We have 3 copies of Blue Sprint. I spoke about Regiodon. 4 copies of Savage Shooter. This is arguably the most important card of the deck. So, when you ride her, you can Soul Blast, draw a card, call a card from hand, give it a gauge. So, the best target for that is Sweeper, because you can draw, call, that's 1. And then, if you're going second, which means you get an attack, you can then swing with Sweeper, and he's hitting for 19, which is a huge number, turn 1. Aside from that, it's just more card advantage, it's more digging, it's more the possibility that you find Spinodriver and don't have to G-assist or sit on the Hill Guardian for the whole game. Listen to Nexus at night for context on that. Yeah, it's a definite 4 of. I think it's the most expensive card in the deck. Don't quote me on that, though. The 3 copies of Prism Bird, not only is that condition easy to fulfill for the 5k, which is put a gauge on something at some point that turn, but it helps you dig for Spino, your Field Guardians, all that good stuff. Being a 13k booster or attacker is easy peasy. There's 2 copies of Laceratorex, which is kind of like Blue Sprint, where instead of going to your field, it goes to your hand, and you get a Soul Blast. You can also call it and put a gauge on, when you call it from hand, you put a gauge on it. So this can work the same way with Spino, where if you have one thing you want on board and one thing you want on hand, put a second gauge, attack with Spino, kill it, and then you get 1 in hand, 1 on field for a counterblast Soul Blast. It's pretty flexible. Savage Shooter can rest and put something from drop onto a raider that doesn't have one. So sometimes there have been games where I'll get rid of something for the Neberos restand, and then I need something in hand next turn, and then just facilitate it that way. It's essentially more copies of Blue Sprint. You can also up Blue Sprint to 4 and put Lysaria Rex down to 1 or whatever. I did it 3-2 because of the hard once per turn. I don't need, it's not hard once per turn for Lysaria Rex, so that's why. 2 copies of Sonic Noah, which is when he boosts something, put a gauge on it, and then if he boosts or attacks and hits, you can retire another rear guard. This is mostly used in the early game because, let's say, the thing from before, Savage Shooter, draw, call Sweeper, he gets 1 gauge. Call Sonic Noah behind Sweeper, attack with Savage Shooter for 8, attack with Noah and Sweeper, who then give Sweeper gauge, so that's 2, and Sweeper's already at that magic 3 gauge for the now 32k swing. I wasn't running Sonic Noah for a long time, up until about like a week before we had to hand in our deck lists. So the choice in that was definitely worth the trouble as 2 of. He may come out as time goes on, but he wasn't really a factor in all of the 4 games I played during the regional. So obviously the 4 Hill Guardians, too good not to play. I played the Dragon Empire Overtrigger because, although it kind of sucks if you get it on the first Neberos attack because it restands before your drive checks, it is good any other time in the game. Sometimes you don't even go into Neberos, so the chances of that are very low, as opposed to just the vanilla one. There's 3 Coal Magnum, which is when it gets put in drop zone during my turn. Put it on bottom, draw a card, give something 5k. This is mostly just to be prey, as I call it, as opposed to being the stand trigger. It replaces itself in your hand. It's just a good card. There's 3 PGs and 1 crit Sentinel. I was running 4 PGs, but I took out the Engorge PG in favor of a crit Sentinel. A, because it means more crits for pressure, and B, because I was running out of counterblast in the sense of the Engorge PG. Lastly, for Stride Fodder crits for obvious reasons. Now for the G-Zone. We have 3 copies of Neberos, who is Engorged, and then when he becomes Engorged, you put 5 rear guards or gauge into drop zone. Retire 2 of the opponent's rear guards and recents. So that means that it happens before the attack and the drive checks, which means that unlike Overlords or anything like that, if a Mega Colony player tries to drop Brilliant Blister on you, it doesn't matter because he's already standing. I like this thing very much a lot. The other effect is while he's in G-Zone, you can still last minute gauge on something and make it become Engorged. That affect's less of a thing. He is super, super good. He can go into it most of the time. You don't really need him at 4 because you can turn anything face up. 2 copies of Gangster Raptor, which is when you play something from hand, you put 3 gauge from drop as gauge onto it, and then when he attacks, you counterblast, turn anything G-Zone face up, stand all of your rear guards with 3 or more gauge on them, and then kill the same amount of rear guards your opponent has. This you go into less often, but it's still a thing you go into, and it's when you have 1 Sweeper Concanto on the field, you can still use it to get 2 attacks out of them. You can also, if you have a Sweeper in hand, you call it, and then just put 3 gauge on it, and there it is. It's good stuff. 2 copies of Gaia Dynasty. This is basically Gaia on legs. So, you mostly use it if you have like a ton of counterblast and you just want to recall everything back to the board. It can also retire an entire column, so if the opponent has something super important in the back corner or just can't be chosen, use that to get around that. 2 copies of Gaia Devastation. So originally, this was used as a way to get more card advantage, but Neberos now does that. The reason you use Gaia Devastation now is because you can choose the circles as opposed to choosing the rear guard, so that gets around resist or things that just says can't be chosen. And then also you can kill your own box if you're playing against Link Choker, because you just choose the circle, retire what's on it. The important thing is against Regalia, where you can kill their thorns while they have a gauge on them, unless they're on Yggdrasil. If they rode Yggdrasil, you're screwed, but if they're on Angelica or something, that's fine, they're dead. Not as much of a problem for you. 2 copies of Bullish Primer, which gets 5k shield for every open circle. So if you happen to use Spinodriver turn 3, and then you G-Guard into this, that is an extra 10k shield without even having to do anything. This is probably one of the best flip G-Guards in the game just because it works when you're behind, which is always great, as opposed to something like Aqua Forces where you need filled circles to get the effect off. Dimorph Phalanx just gets extra 5k shield for free, Dismal protects important rear guards, and then Vulcan Tornado, the GBA, rarely comes up. You mostly just use it for flip fodder, but when it does, it's pretty good. So that was the deck profile. The list is down in the description, like I said. If you want to hear more about how this deck did and what actually happened, check out the Nexus at Night episode where I talked about Springfest 2022. Again, link for that will be in the description. We got merch, that's down there also. Follow us at Nexus at Night on Twitter, or if you like what we do, support us on Patreon. Leave